Throughout this course, I'm going to introduce you to cybersecurity. We're going to cover the basics. We're going to cover the very foundation of cybersecurity, and I want to invite you to join me in this ride. So first, let's go through the basics, the very basics, the foundation. What is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is the state of being protected against the criminal or unauthorized use of electronic data or the measures taken to achieve this, and this is taken from Google Dictionary. All right, so in cybersecurity, cyber has to do with the internet, and then security, so it's not really securing the internet but securing your data and your systems that are exposed to the internet. All right, and you are also preventing unauthorized access to your data and to your systems. You're also trying to avoid some kind of abuse over the internet. It can be done over the internet. It can be done within your own local network by a malicious insider. So in other words, you're just trying to keep information systems safe. You're just trying to ensure that whatever it is that you have saved on your computer, whatever it is you've saved on a server, whatever it is you've saved in a data repository still remains the same, remains untampered, and you want to ensure that folks without authorized access aren't allowed access to that data. They aren't allowed access to the system. Okay. Now let's see what Wikipedia defines cybersecurity as. It's also known as computer security, also known as cybersecurity, also known as information technology security. You can call it InfoSec or IT security. All right. So Wikipedia says that it's the protection of computer systems and networks from theft of or damage to their hardware, software, or electronic data, as well as from the disruption or misdirection of the services that they provide. All right. So this is no different from what I said earlier. You're trying to protect hardware, trying to protect software, all right, and you're trying to protect the data on it. Okay. Now, if you render services, you're trying to ensure that the services that are rendered over the internet or via a local network are not tampered with. Okay, we're trying to ensure that these services are available 24/7 and they are functioning as intended. All right, so that covers that. Let's move on. So now let's go on to the core security concepts. Security usually comes with purpose. All right, so the question we should ask ourselves is, what are you trying to secure? Okay, what aspect of functionality are you trying to secure? What are you trying to achieve? If you are securing a particular system, if you are securing a particular set of data, if you are securing a particular service, probably you offer e-commerce services. You're an organization that offers e-commerce services. You sell groceries over the internet. Okay, so let's start with confidentiality. Okay, integrity and availability. So these are the main security concepts. There are others, but they are secondary to these three, and these three are collectively known as the CIA triad. And in the slides to come, we'll discuss these three core security concepts, but these are the main building blocks of cybersecurity, and it's going to be quite interesting. So let's start with confidentiality. What's confidentiality? Confidentiality is when you're talking about confidentiality, you're talking about maintaining secrecy of data, maintaining secrecy of a particular system. You're trying to ensure that prying eyes do not have access to this data. You're trying to ensure that people without unauthorized access do not have access to this data. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Let's go back to our example of the e-commerce company that sells groceries over the internet. Okay, now how do we maintain confidentiality? You're trying to ensure that customer data in your database are not available to people who shouldn't have access to it. Okay, now customer data should be available to only the customer. All right, for example, if I sign up as John Bullion, okay, and I have my email address as johnbullion@yahoo.com. All right, and then I have my records, my purchase records on this particular e-commerce site, and it shows that I bought a television on, let's say, last week, and then afterwards I bought a pair of shoes, and then afterwards I bought a pair of glasses. Okay, now this data should remain private to me, so confidentiality enforces privacy. All right, confidentiality ensures that data doesn't fall into the wrong hands, and it also ensures that this data is viewable by only the owner. All right, now as a means of ensuring confidentiality, you can use encryption. Now what is encryption? Encryption is just a way of hiding data to conceal the original meaning. Okay, just a means of scrambling data using a specific type of algorithm. Now when you use encryption, when you use encryption in a particular kind of data, the original owner is the only person that can have access to this data, because he's the only one that can decrypt this data, because he's the only one that has the decryption key. All right, but to someone who does not have access to this data, the data is not viewable by him because it's scrambled and has no meaning. Okay, access controls are also another means of protecting confidentiality of data, because with strict access controls, you ensure that only the correct owner of the data, only the original owner of the data has access. All right, so back to our example of the e-commerce site, speaking about access to customer data. I'm the only one that should have access to my data. All right, now in the software that runs the database, the software that runs the site, there could be logical controls to say, okay, let only John Bullion have access to his data, okay, and let only those who create this data have access to the data. Okay, now this is what we call access control. You ensure that only the original owner has access to this particular data. Only the original owner has access to the information systems that own the data. This is on another level now. So let's say, for example, in an organization, there's a file server that hosts information for the sales department. Now we can use access controls to ensure that only members of the sales department have access to that particular server, and if only members of the sales department have access to that particular server, it also means they're the only ones that have access to that data. Okay, now this access control can be enforced by using probably an access control list on a firewall. You can ensure that only members of the sales department have access to it. All right, let's talk about steganography. Steganography is a means of hiding data in data. Okay, now in steganography, you are manipulating what we call the least significant bits of a particular kind of data. So in steganography, I can hide a picture in a picture, but if I look at the picture, it still looks like the picture wasn't tampered with. Okay, it looks like the image wasn't tampered with, but really, if you deep dive into that image, you would notice that there's actually an image hidden in it. So how that works is this: anything digital can be split or reduced down to binary numbers. All right, so by having the original image, all right, split into or reduced to binary numbers, and then taking the attached image, and then you distribute the bits of that image, the ones and zeros, and try to embed it in the original image. Okay, and then you try to manipulate only the least significant bits of the original image. And when you do that and you render it, it still shows as if it's just one image. It still shows as if the original image has not been tampered with. Okay, but then there are certain software that can actually do this. All right, there are certain types of software that can help you hide data in data, and then probably you send it over the network, or you send it to someone it is intended for. Okay, and then when the person gets the message, he can extract that data from the data it was hidden. Okay, now obfuscation is just a way of is a form of encryption. It hides the original meaning of data. Okay, you can obfuscate probably by scrambling. You can obfuscate by replacing certain characters with a certain kind of character. So obfuscation just hides the original meaning of data. And let's move on to integrity. What is integrity? When you're talking of integrity, you are trying to ensure that data has not been tampered with. In confidentiality, you are ensuring that data, those who don't have authorized access to data, okay, can't access it, they can't see it. Okay, and then in integrity, we go a step further to ensure that even if they are able to access the data, they are not able to tamper with it. All right. Back to our example, if someone is able to have access to the database, integrity would ensure that no one with unauthorized access is able to change records in the customer database. All right, now how can we ensure that someone doesn't go to John Bullion's account and change his name, change his email, all right, change his biodata, and also change metadata about the raw files stored in the database? How can we ensure that? Integrity ensures that. So integrity is another pillar of security. Okay, now how can we ensure integrity? We ensure it by hashing. Now when you hash a particular kind of data, you is just an operation that produces a fixed length of characters to identify that data. All right, so let's say for example I send a file, a document, a PowerPoint presentation over to my colleague. Let me call my colleague Spencer. So what I do is I calculate the hash of this PowerPoint file, all right, and then I send it to Spencer and I send him the hash. So what Spencer does is this: Spencer also calculates the hash of that PowerPoint file. Now if it matches what the hash value I sent to him, it means the PowerPoint file has not been tampered with. But if it's different, it means that the file has been tampered with. Now to show you how interesting this is, if I open a PowerPoint file and I change just one character, maybe I change B to A, just one, and then I calculate the hash or perform a hash operation over the PowerPoint file, it will be totally different from the original hash value. All right, so this is also a way to measure integrity, to ensure that data hasn't been changed. All right, now another way of ensuring integrity is by use of digital signatures. If I send Spencer an email and I digitally sign that email, and Spencer receives that email message with my signature, it means that I am the one that has sent him that email, and I can't deny that I wasn't the one who sent the email. That is non-repudiation. Non-repudiation ensures that someone who sent a message can't deny that he's the one, because he has left a digital footprint on that particular message. So this is what integrity is all about. It's all about ensuring that data that is stored, sent, or being used has not been tampered with maliciously. So it preserves the integrity of data, and this is another pillar of security. So let's move on now to the third pillar, which is availability. So what is availability? Availability just ensures that data, information systems, and services are available to authorized users whenever they need it. So let's use a popular e-commerce site, for example, Amazon. Now, availability ensures that even if I wake up around 2 a.m. in the morning and I want to shop on Amazon, Amazon site is readily available. Not just that I can reach the site, but I can perform transactions. I can buy what I want to buy, and the transaction will be successful, and I can get a notification that I just bought probably a pair of sneakers and it's going to be shipped soon. All right. So availability ensures that information systems are always available, data is always available, services are always available to legitimate authorized users. But in the case of Amazon Web Services, authorized users here represents the public. Anybody can have access to Amazon. But also, to take it a step further, anyone with an account on Amazon, a personal account on Amazon, for example, I have my account on Amazon. If I can log in, means I'm a legitimate user. As availability ensures that people like me that have accounts created with my email on Amazon can shop at any time of the day, 24/7. Now, how can we ensure availability of information systems? How can we ensure availability of data? How can we ensure availability of web services, of other kinds of services rendered over the internet? Now, we talk of redundancy and fault tolerance. So I'll give an example. In the case of Amazon, they won't just have only one web server because it will be the capacity to handle traffic will be too small for just one web server. So redundancy ensures that there isn't just one web server, but there are multiple web servers with something called a load balancer just in front of all these web servers. The web servers are identical. So what the load balancer does is that it shares the traffic equally among all the web servers to ensure that no server is overwhelmed with too much traffic. It also ensures that users have a seamless experience when they are shopping, when they are trying to buy things off Amazon. All right. And redundancy is the same with fault tolerance, because if one web server goes down, the traffic for that web server is equally distributed to other web servers that are available, and that gives the administrator, the IT technician, a whole lot of time to troubleshoot what the error is and probably bring back that server up. Now, in the case of data storage, what redundancy does is that instead of storing data on just one disk, you can actually store data on more than one disk, and the technique behind this is called RAID, redundant array of disks. All right. Now, what it does is when you store data on one disk, sometimes it can copy that data to other redundant disks, okay, other available disks, such that when one disk goes bad, the other disks are available to fill in for that disk. All right. And it helps with performance, and it also helps with availability. It also helps with fault tolerance, okay. Another way to ensure availability is by means of DDoS protection, okay. Now, what do we mean by DDoS? DDoS means distributed denial of service. The simplest form actually is called denial of service. So what denial of service does is it prevents services from being available to legitimate users, and they're usually carried out by malicious hackers who have what we call botnets. Botnets is just a network of computers that are zombies. They have malware installed on them, and the original owners of these computers do not even know that they have malware on their computer. All right. Now, anytime a malicious hacker wants to carry out a DDoS attack against a particular system, all it needs to do is just to run a command, and then all these zombie computers just start sending packets, start sending traffic to the intended victim. Now, because the victim is not able to handle the overwhelming amount of traffic it's receiving, it becomes out of service to legitimate users. So when the traffic comes from multiple zombies, then is a distributed denial of service. But when it comes from just one system, then it is a denial of service. All right. But when it comes from multiple systems, it is a distributed denial of service. So like I said earlier, it's just an attempt to overwhelm a particular service, a particular server, a particular website with so much traffic larger than what it can handle normally, okay, such that it becomes unavailable to legitimate users. So how do you protect from DDoS? We have what we call DDoS protection mechanisms. It filters traffic, all right, based on bandwidth. Okay, so when it sees that the traffic coming in is getting to almost more than what it can handle, it just cuts off the traffic and ensures that the service is still available. Another means of ensuring availability is by patching. Now, a patch is a fix for a vulnerability, all right? Now, it's mostly for software, mostly for operating systems. Say, for example, in Windows operating system, if there's a particular vulnerability that makes the Windows service to go offline when someone exploits it, a patch is usually released by Microsoft, all right? And most of these vulnerabilities, they lead to what you call denial of service. So because one threat actor is exploiting this vulnerability, is no longer distributed, it is just a direct denial of service, all right? Now, by patching it, you can avoid exploitation of this vulnerability, okay? Another thing is resource optimization. By resource optimization, you're just trying to ensure that each server has enough RAM, each server has enough hard disk space, each server has enough processing power to handle whatever traffic is being directed its way. Okay, now these are ways to ensure availability, and we've discussed confidentiality. We said that confidentiality is just a way of preventing prying eyes, preventing unauthorized users from having access to the data, from seeing the data. We said that confidentiality is a means of enforcing privacy. We also said integrity is a means of ensuring that data has not been tampered with, whether in use, whether the data is at rest, that is, whether it's being stored, and whether the data is being sent across the network, sent to an intended recipient. I've also discussed mechanisms to enforce confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information systems. So these are the three main pillars that are the building blocks of cybersecurity. So let's go to cyber risk basis. So before we can talk about risk, we can't talk about risk without talking about threats and vulnerabilities. All right. Now, everything cybersecurity follows a risk-based approach because we are trying to protect information systems and services from a cyber attack. All right. And a cyber attack has risk that it comes with. Okay. Now, what is a threat? So let's use this definition from Prey Project to say threat, a cyber or a cybersecurity threat is a malicious act that seeks to damage data, steal data, or disrupt digital life in general. Cyber attacks include threats like computer viruses, data breaches, and denial of service attacks. So threats are the agents that cause cyber attacks. All right, that's my own definition. They are the agents that cause cyber attacks. All right. So their main aim is to steal, their main aim is to tamper with, their main aim is to breach, their main aim is to compromise. They just render information systems unavailable. They can render them useless. They can cause losses for organizations. They can cause losses for original legitimate users. All right. Now, let's look at what a vulnerability is. A vulnerability is a weakness or a flaw in a system. So let me give an example. In the year 2017, something happened that took the world by surprise. There was a massive ransomware outbreak. Now, ransomware is a kind of virus, a kind of malware that encrypts a computer system and asks for a ransom to be paid in order for the decryption key to be released. So, for example, if my system gets infected with ransomware and it gets encrypted, the hacker that installed the ransomware on my system probably will ask me to pay a ransom of maybe $50, $100, $200, or maybe for up to $1,000. It depends. All right. Now, when I pay that money, when I pay that ransom, the hacker will probably send me the decryption key. Okay. Now, when I input the decryption key, the system decrypts. All right, and then I have access to my data back. So ransomware is a form of digital kidnapping. All right, so now, like we said earlier, a vulnerability is a weakness or a flaw in the system, and I was talking about WannaCry. And when this ransomware happened, we discovered that the virus was able to install itself into systems because the systems had a particular vulnerability, the MS17-010. You can check that out later. It took the world by surprise in the year 2017, and fortunately, a malware analyst called Marcus Hutchins was able to analyze the malware and was able to stop the attack by taking down the domain that was causing the command and control, that was causing the propagation of the virus. Okay, so now let's go back to risk. We've defined what a threat is. We've defined what vulnerability is. So now risk is the probability that a threat will exploit a vulnerability. And that's quite interesting. Risk is the likelihood that a threat would exploit a vulnerability. So let's go back to our ransomware story. We're trying to secure my computer system in the organization. All right. Now, we have identified a particular risk that a WannaCry, or let's say a ransomware, can exploit a particular vulnerability inherent in Windows systems. So what we do is we highlight the risk of ransomware infection. All right. So what we now do is this: since we've identified the risk, we take measures to ensure that the vulnerability is taken care of, because the threat is not within our control. Okay, you can't control whether a hacker will hack you. You can't control whether a ransomware will hit your system. So what do we now do now that we've identified the risk of ransomware spreading? Okay, so what we do is this: you check the system. If it has that particular vulnerability, MS17-010, if the vulnerability is there, you patch it. Now, since you need threat and vulnerability to be present, okay, you take out the one that is within your control, which is the vulnerability, you fix it. And since a threat is useless without a vulnerability, it means you have taken care of that risk. But that doesn't mean you should go back and then rest on your oars. It means you should still monitor actively, because threats have a means of changing. Threats are changing. Threats are always evolving. They are always adapting. Okay, that's why you can create a secure environment, and within the next few months, that environment that was thought to be secure would become as weak as its original state. Okay, so risk has to do with likelihood that a threat will exploit a vulnerability, and then you're also looking at the impact of the crystallization of risk. So for example, let's say I'm the one that handles payroll for my company, and then my system has this vulnerability, the MS17-010. Like I said, you can Google that and see what that is all about. And then what happens if the ransomware virus gets installed on my system? All right, and my system gets encrypted, and then I'm asked to pay probably a ransom of $1,000 to a particular Bitcoin address to get a decryption key. So what's the impact of that happening? What's the negative effect on my organization? The staff will not be able to get paid because payroll data resides on my system. Although that shouldn't be. Payroll data is meant to reside on a secured server, and then I'm supposed to use my system to connect to that server. Okay, so I'm just giving that as an example. I'm assuming that payroll data is localized on my system. So what that means is the staff in my organization won't be able to get paid, all right, and can cause them to become agitated, can cause them to think that their employer is just using them and doesn't want to pay them on time. But actually, it was a digital risk that crystallized. So I believe we understand the very basic of risk. So let's go now to cyber risk and threat assessment. So what is risk assessment? Risk assessment is the process of identifying risk and treating the risk to ensure that it doesn't crystallize. Okay, and the same definition applies to threats. You're identifying threats and you're putting measures in place to ensure that threats do not exploit vulnerabilities in your environment. Okay, so like I said earlier concerning the ransomware case, we are conducting a risk assessment for probably a payroll server. So now let's assume that things were done properly and payroll data was stored on the server. All right, now what is the risk that comes with the payroll data? Number one, like I always say, malware infection, especially when it's a Windows system. Okay, number two, the risk of data theft due to unauthorized access. So let's analyze that risk. When you see the risk of data theft due to unauthorized access, what's the vulnerability there? Someone who did not have authorized access was able to access the data. So that means proper measures were not put in place to prevent unauthorized users from viewing that data. Okay, now when you are assessing risk, you consider the likelihood and the impact. So for some people, they like to analyze risk using quantitative and qualitative means. When you are using quantitative means, you are using numerical values, okay, to rate the risk, to rate the likelihood, to rate the impact. Okay, but there are some times that you can't use numerical values to quantify these parameters of risk. So what you do is you use qualitative analysis. Qualitative analysis, you use situations like high, medium, low, all right, or maybe just high and low. Okay, but usually is a critical, high, medium, and low. Okay, so now when you identify each risk, you rank the risk. Okay, what is the impact of this risk? Is it high? Is it medium? Is it low? Okay, or sometimes you can also, not sometimes, all the time, you can also rank the likelihood of this risk happening. Okay, you can use qualitative and quantitative analysis rather for that. Okay, so risk is also likelihood times impact. Okay, now for threat assessment, remember I said earlier that threats are beyond your control. You don't have any control over attackers, you don't have any control over viruses, but you have control over the impact if you can take care of the vulnerabilities. All right, so let me give an example. Let's assume my company is an e-commerce company and we have a particular web server. All right, now we have identified the threat of a malicious hacker trying to hack the website. Okay, so now we implemented a web application firewall. What the web application firewall does is that it prevents web application attacks from going through. Okay, now I personally have managed a web application firewall before. Since the inception of my career to date, I have managed a web application firewall, and I noticed that putting the firewall there doesn't stop attacks, but it prevents the attacks, because you would still see traces of web application attacks like brute forcing, trying so many passwords. You see SQL injection, trying to access the database legitimately. You will see the logs because the firewall will block these attacks and then notify you that these are the attacks that we are recording. All right, and then it shows you the IP address of the attacker, shows you the country the attacker is working from. All right, but sometimes these attackers use VPNs to mislead people concerning their location. All right, so that's that about threats. You really have no control over threats. The best you can do is to put measures in place to ensure that when threats try to uh, attack, or when they actually eventually attack your infrastructure, when they attack your services, it does not crystallize into a security incident. Okay, so that's it for risk assessment. You just need to be able to identify risk that come with information systems that come with your services. I need to identify and put measures in place to prevent the risk from crystallizing. So in a ransomware scenario, we said you need to patch the system, you need to have antivirus installed to ensure that the virus does not execute on the system. All right, that's that. Let's move on to the next. So let's see cyber risk response strategies, and there are different ways to respond to risk. All right, in our previous slides, we're talking about identifying this risk and then treating them. Okay, but then the way we treated the ransomware risk is what we call risk mitigation. Okay, I will come back to that, but let's take each of these steps one after the other. So let's go to risk acceptance. So in risk acceptance, organizations, especially management, accept the risk that comes with a particular information system. They accept a risk that has been identified. Okay, so they decide not to do anything about that risk. Okay, and they allow the risk to, because they feel if the risk crystallizes, it has little or no impact on the information systems. All right, so they decide not to do anything about it, and it's also because the cost of mitigating the risk is greater than the benefit of mitigating that risk. So in simpler terms, the cost outweighs the benefit of that risk. Okay, so take for example, let's say the IT administrator is patching servers, is installing security updates on servers because multiple vulnerabilities have been identified. So now he then discovers that there are vulnerabilities of high severity. Well, let's start from the beginning. There are vulnerabilities of critical severity, there are vulnerabilities of high severity, there are vulnerabilities of low severity, and there are also vulnerabilities that are of medium severity. Now he has installed the patches for vulnerabilities of critical, high, and medium. Okay, and is left with that of low severity, and then he says it's not practical to install these patches because they do not give direct access for exploitation, they do not give direct access for compromise, they do not give direct access for breaching. All right, or probably another control that needs to be installed to probably prevent users from staying online after a particular time, and then they have weighed the cost of the control and weigh the benefit of the control. They see that probably nothing happens because users are not online after a particular time. So let's say they are trying to keep users online from only 8 o'clock to 5 p.m., 8 a.m. in the morning to 5 p.m. in the evening, and then as a result they feel probably maybe fraud will reduce or something, but in previous times they've not had any fraud case. Okay, now the cost of implementing that control might be quite expensive compared to the benefits they want to derive from that. So because of that, they decide not to do anything about the risk. What they do is they accept the risk. Okay, so they don't do anything about it. But it's also practical for organizations that accept risk to also monitor that risk. Okay, so at the end of a particular period, probably after maybe 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year, it's also good for you to reevaluate the risk, because environments are changing, risk is also changing, threats are changing, the attackers are adapting, they are evolving. Something that was low severity last month can be high severity next month. Okay, so now when they reevaluate the risk and then you discover that, oh, we had fraud, we had a fraud incident a while back, and it was because this particular user was logged on after work hours, and the cost of the fraud, probably let's say the cost of the fraud was $100,000, and the cost of implementing the control is $1,000. Seriously, who won't use $1,000 to prevent a fraud of $100,000? Quickly, it will go through approval, and then you purchase the control, you install, and then it prevents further fraud incidents from crystallizing. So secondly, we have what we call risk mitigation. Okay, now risk mitigation means that the organization has decided to treat the risk. So by installing those security updates, you are treating the risk. And to give another example, we have seen that users in the organization are able to access servers, are able to access services that do not pertain to them, services, information systems that do not concern them. All right, and as a result, you want to stop this from happening. Then you discover that you need to purchase a firewall, an internal firewall, and probably segment the network. Okay, so segmentation is like a logical division of the network to ensure that those on one segment cannot access resources on another segment. So you put users by department in a particular segment. So the sales department have their segments, information technology department have their segments, all other departments have their different segments, and they are not able to gain access to resources that do not pertain to them. All right, so purchasing, implementing, and configuring that firewall is a means of mitigating that risk. Now, after implementing that control, that safeguard, you notice that the risk is reevaluated, and the likelihood is quite low. Okay, because you've bought a control that you really trust and is quite effective. Now, let's go to another one. This is risk avoidance. Risk avoidance. Now, what does it mean when an organization decides to avoid risk? So I'll give an example. So let's say an organization is trying to launch a web service where people can query this service and get maybe weather forecasts in real time. Now, this is an organization that is into e-commerce, but they just want to offer this as a free service, or what we call a freemium service. All right, and then the web service will be exposed to the internet and users will query it. But the cyber risk analyst has discovered that if this web service is developed and exposed over the network, users can exploit a particular vulnerability, known or unknown, to gain access to the company's network from the outside. That's quite a serious one. Now, the company's management decides to sit together, and then they discover that this is actually a risk. If we expose this, users from the outside can exploit this service and they can connect to our network. All right, and we don't have the necessary means to stop them from having a field day in our network. And after talking and deliberating together, they decide that to prevent this risk from crystallizing, they decide not to launch that web service anymore. They take it out of their service portfolio. All right, So that's um, web service that gives access to users to get weather forecasts in real time. They decide not to go on with the project at all. So by not going on with the project, they have prevented that risk. So that's a means of avoiding risk. They decide to abandon a particular business mission because there's a risk involved. So another example, but this is not in cyber terms. Take for example an insurance company or maybe an investment company. There's an investment company. They want to invest in a particular stock that gives them a 50-50 probability of cashing out or not cashing out. And because they want to invest quite a huge amount of money, let's say $1 billion. All right. Now it means that if they put in that $1 billion, they could either be $3 billion richer after 6 months or $1 billion poorer after 6 months. Okay. Now because it's a 50-50 probability, you might decide and say, wow, $1 billion is quite a lot of money and we're not willing to lose that. So we do not want to continue with this investment. We are taking our money elsewhere. So they decide not to engage in any activity just so that risk doesn't crystallize. So this is what risk avoidance is all about. Now for the last risk response strategy is called risk transference. So what this does is that you transfer the risk to a third party. So let me give an example. Let's assume now that Amazon wants to open a new data center here in Lagos, Nigeria. So what Amazon does is this: they assess the terrain, and then they discover that the best place to build this data center is actually Lagos, Nigeria, probably in Victoria Island. And then after carrying out an environmental analysis, they discover that an earthquake usually happens or is bound to happen probably once every 2 years or once every 5 years. Now because they stand to make a lot of money if they locate this data center in Lagos, Nigeria, okay? And because if the earthquake crystallizes, they also have a backup data center in another state of the country. But because if the earthquake affects Lagos, the facility would be affected. There will be damages. They know that is bound to happen, and they can't control that threat of earthquakes. So what they do is they purchase insurance such that when the earthquake crystallizes, all right, and there are damages, because they have paid a premium, the insurance company can come around, assess the damages and say, oh, so these damages are worth $2 billion. We'll pay you that money. All right, so they haven't lost any money really. There's damage, but they've gotten the value back, and it's usually the cost to rebuild that they insure for. So they rebuild the data center and they carry on with business as usual. But while all this is going on, probably the backup data center has been activated and work is still ongoing. Activities are still being carried out. So this is the way risk transference works. So these are the 4 ways of handling risk. After identifying and analyzing risk and assessing the likelihood and the impact, organizations usually choose one of these 4 means of treating the risk. Now, if you don't treat risk ahead of time, it would crystallize into a cybersecurity incident. So one of the reasons why companies are actually getting breached, they are getting hacked, they're getting compromised, is probably because either they don't carry out a risk assessment at all, or they don't carry out a thorough risk assessment. So I just want to believe that we are okay with the explanation of the 4 cyber risk response strategies. So let's go now to cybersecurity controls. What's a control? A control is a safeguard that limits the impact of a risk that crystallizes. Okay. Most times they limit the impact before the risk crystallizes. Okay. And they also limit the impact after the risk crystallizes. So let's go back to our web application firewall example. Remember I said because the web application is vulnerable to hackers, even if they've done a security assessment, they fixed the vulnerabilities, but because it's public facing and it's accessible to everybody on the internet. So now the company has decided to purchase a web application firewall that stands in between the web application and normal users, and also stands in between the web application and hackers. So what happens is that web application firewall is a control. So when a hacker tries to brute force the web application firewall notices that this is a brute force attack, so it blocks the attacker from proceeding. All right, so he has limited the impact of that risk of illegal access via brute forcing. Okay, even before the illegal access crystallizes. All right, so give another example of DDoS protection, distributed denial of service. So let's assume there are 1 million infected computers on the internet sending traffic to that particular web server, but because the web application firewall is active and the web application firewall has a distributed denial of service module available, what happens is that it detects it because the traffic would have gotten above a particular threshold that was set. Then when it sees that, oh, this is heading towards a distributed denial of service, what it now does is it stops traffic from all these sources. All right, and then it ensures that legitimate users have access to the web application, and the web application do not go down for even 1 second. So this is what controls are all about. They are just safeguards. They are watch guards that are implemented to limit the impact of risk before crystallization and after crystallization. And in most cases, with good cybersecurity controls implemented, risks do not crystallize. Even if they crystallize, the impact is quite minimal. Okay, so what are controls? Like I said earlier, they are also known as safeguards. Okay, they are safeguards. They stand in between information assets and risk. Okay, they are like the Great Walls of China. All right, so just like I said, they stand in between information systems and users, stand between information systems and hackers. All right, they are mechanisms to prevent or limit the impacts of a cyber attack. In most cases, the cyber attack doesn't go through, and this depends on whether the control is effective, whether it is implemented correctly, whether it is working as intended. That's why you always need to do a control assessment. You need to confirm that this cybersecurity control is still working, or has it been phased out? Is there need to upgrade it? Is there need to replace it? Okay, so controls can be physical, they can be logical, they can also be abstract. All right, so we're going to look at the different types of controls later in this course. And controls are usually selected based on business need for them. So don't just choose any control and implement because they look good. Okay, so you don't implement a web application firewall because you need to implement it. There are cases where you can implement a web application firewall right? And then if it is not properly configured, it can deny access to legitimate users. All right, so web application firewalls and other controls are selected based on business needs. So business need means, for example, back to our web application firewall, we discovered that hackers have been running SQL injection script or running malicious scripts to try to get into the application. So you install this web application firewall to limit that, to stop that from happening, to identify who is running these scripts. All right, so this is an example of a business need. Don't just implement controls because they are interesting. Don't just implement controls because your friend in another organization recommended them, but you only install and implement controls based on what the business needs. There again, this is a proper definition of a cybersecurity control. So let's look at this definition by cyber experts. Cybersecurity controls are the countermeasures that companies implement to detect, prevent, reduce, or counteract to security risk. I'll take that again. Cybersecurity controls are the countermeasures that companies implement to detect, prevent, reduce, or counteract to security risk. They are the measures that a business deploys. Remember I said based on business need. So taking that again, they are the measures that a business deploys to manage threats targeting computer systems and networks. The controls keep on changing to adapt to an evolving cyber environment. So this just covers everything I already said. Controls must change. Controls are never static because the cyber environment is always evolving. Okay, now we have more powerful computers that can crack user passwords at a much faster rate than normal standard computers would. All right, and you need to have controls in place to ensure that passwords are stronger. I also need to have controls to ensure that you don't use only passwords to authenticate to services. Now, this means that even if an attacker is able to lay hold on a user's password and is able to crack it, with the password alone, he cannot gain access to the system. He needs another means of authentication. All right, but we're going to go through that later in this course. So let's see types of controls. So first up, we have what we call technical controls. Technical controls are computer-based controls. All right, they are created by computer, controlled by computer, and managed by a computer. Can be executed also by a computer. Okay, they are mostly software based, 90% software based. Administrative controls are also known as directive controls. All right, they are usually created and enacted based on management discretion. Okay, they are mostly policy based. That's why it's called directive, because it directs people on acceptable use and acceptable behavior so that risks do not crystallize. All right, then you also have what we call physical controls. Physical controls are safeguards that we can see, we can touch, and we can feel. All right, they are physical because it directly protects hardware or restricts humans from gaining access to hardware and then software as a result. Okay, so these are the different types of controls, and we'll explore them one after the other in the next slides. So let's look at technical controls. So I said earlier, they are digital in nature. They are created by computers. Okay, they could also be standalone computers. All right, and they are managed by computers. Okay, although it involves some form of human interaction to configure them, but they are orchestrated by computers. All right, now they provide automated protection and have misuse detection capabilities, and they require little or no human intervention. Now, what that means is that the the little human intervention needed is uh just to configure the controls. All right, so you configure and then you let it run. Okay, and then because it can detect misuse, it can detect anomalies, it can detect violations. Okay, it can respond to certain scenarios. Okay, so they are quite technical. Example of technical control, as you can see in the slides, encryption is a technical control. So when you encrypt data, you are ensuring confidentiality of the data. Remember, you just had to encrypt once, and then the encryption performed the rest of the job. All right. You also have an IDS. IDS is called Intrusion Detection System. So what it does is that it detects anomalous behaviors over a network. Detects anomalies, detects misuse. Now, intrusion detection systems usually have what we call signatures. All right, so if someone is brute forcing a particular server or a web application, it has a signature for that particular brute force, and then when there's a match between a particular activity and a signature, it responds based on the response that is pre-configured. All right, now a firewall is also an example of a technical control. What a firewall does is to instill security within the network. All right, you can restrict access, you can grant access, you can ensure that only those who have the necessary permissions have access to a particular resource. You can use a firewall to uh, create segments in a network. All right, in conjunction with switches. We'll come back to that. Now, another type of technical control is antivirus. Antivirus prevents malicious software from running on a system. Okay, prevent malicious software from running on a system. Also have the principle of least privilege. This can be managed also on operating systems. Remember that on operating systems you have user mode and you have administrator mode. Okay, now notice that sometimes when you try to install a particular software, you see a pop-up that says do you really want to install this software? That is the system prompting you that you need administrative privileges to run that software because you are running in normal user mode. And because you are a local administrator, you click yes, that software runs. But if you are in a corporate environment, okay, and it's managed by what we call Active Directory, when you receive the pop-up, it will ask you to impute administrator credentials because you are not an administrator by default. You are just a normal user. So the principle of this privilege states that all users should be granted the least privilege possible to conduct their daily tasks. Okay, so don't use super privileges, don't use administrative privileges to perform little tasks. Okay, so for example, if I'm creating a Word document, I don't need administrative privileges. The reason for that is this: if I'm running on administrative privileges just to maybe create a PowerPoint to send an email for which I need just normal user privileges, if my system gets infected, okay, with a malware, and that malware runs a particular process, what will happen is that process would also have administrative privileges because I'm currently running with administrative privileges. But if I'm running with normal user privileges, what will happen is that the malware will run with normal user privileges and will be limited in what it can do because a user with normal user privileges cannot perform all functions or activities as a user with administrative or super or root privileges. Okay, it's called administrative privileges. It's also called root privileges. It's also called super user privileges, and on the OS level is called kernel level privileges. Okay, I'll go over that again. Administrative privileges are also known as root privileges, super user privileges, and also known as kernel based privileges or kernel level privileges. Okay, so that's that about technical controls. Let's go to administrative controls. Administrative controls are mostly directive in nature. Okay, like I said, they are always policy based. So an example of administrative controls is this signal you are seeing here. Sorry, this image you are seeing on the screen, authorized personnel only. So you can put it in front of a data center or on the door of a data center, and that alone creates this mental impression on passers-by that if they have not been explicitly granted permission to access the data center, then probably the data center is not for them. All right. Administrative privileges could also be a security policy where users are directed on what to do. Okay, so administrative controls lessen threats to and due to an individual. Okay, administrative controls always come in form of instructions. That's why they are called directive controls. They are directive in nature and are usually enacted by senior management. They are actually the intent of senior management for staff or for users in an organization. So senior management might say, all right, users, we have laptops, but when you are using company laptops, you don't use it for your personal use. You don't access social media sites. You don't access pornographic sites. You don't access torrent sites. All right. So these are examples of administrative controls. Administrative controls could also mean, all right, users, we notice that fraud usually happens after work hours, and so as a result, once it's 5 o'clock, we don't want to see you online. Okay, so that's an administrative control. All right, and as I've shown you earlier on the screen, you can have signposts that just say authorized personnel only. All right. So that's all about administrative controls. They are directive in nature and it communicates the intent of senior management, and they actually protect individuals, and in turn they protect the organization. Let's go now to physical controls. Physical controls can be seen and they can be touched. All right. Physical controls are used to control unauthorized access to buildings, to facilities, to data centers. All right, and they are installed at strategic locations. So an example could be biometrics. So I want to gain access to a data center and I have a door that is locked with a biometric system. So what that means is that, so back to the biometric control, it just ensures that only those who have authorized access can enter the data center. So if I have access, for example, it means that either my fingerprint or my facial recognition data has been collected, and so if I want to enter the data center, I just place in my finger and I'm granted access. Okay, and or probably I just go there, I put my face before the scanner and it grants me access. Another example is CCTV. All right, a CCTV camera, it can be used as a deterrent and a detective control. All right, so I'll talk about that in the slides to come. So you can use it to detect violations and to scare people away. Okay, to scare those with malicious intents away, and it's usually installed at strategic locations. Okay, so let's see another slide. So let's see the goals of security controls. We've assessed, we've learned about the types of controls. Now let's see the goals and what the purpose of these controls. Now we have what we call preventive controls. What preventive controls do is that they stop crystallization of a compromise, they stop crystallization of a violation, stop crystallization of a risk, that is, stop cyber attacks from becoming successful. Example of a preventive control is antivirus. Antivirus stops malware from being executed on the system, alright? And that's one. We also have keep mentioning the web application firewall because it's quite in use today. Prevents web application attacks. Okay. Then another form of preventive control we have uh, biometric locks. Okay. So it prevents unauthorized access to a data center or to a facility, because if your biometric data is not collected, you can't have access. Okay. Now another goal is detective control. So what this does is it tries to find out the details about a particular violations. Like it detects violations. An example is CCTV. Okay, so when you assuming someone broke into a facility, can use CCTV records to determine who broke into the facility, and also if someone has done something malicious on a system, you can use logging or auditing on a system to detect who has done what on a particular workstation or on a particular server. And this is because all activities being carried out are tied to a particular username, and most times or sometimes they are tied to an IP address. So if it can be narrowed down to your username or your IP address, then you have questions to answer. Then we have what we call deterrent controls. Now for deterrent controls, these controls usually uh, are the ones that scare malicious attackers away. So for example, CCTV can also serve as a deterrent, because when you see that there's a CCTV in front of a facility you're trying to break into, okay, or probably you're trying to perform something over a computer and there's a CCTV just over your shoulders, it lets you know that you do it, you get caught. So you might rethink your actions. All right, another form of deterrent control is what we call uh, warning banners. So, for example, you're about to gain access to a system and then you see a warning banner that says, "Warning, unauthorized access will be punished with probably with jail term." Wow. So you know that when you log in, it can be detected and they get you, you can go to jail. Honestly, you rethink, uh, you're actually going to rethink um, going on with what you want to do, all right? So another type of control we have here is corrective controls. Corrective controls. These ones are normally used after damage has been done. It's used to restore the system back to working state, normal working state, normal operating state. All right. So let's give an example. Let's assume there was a database server that didn't have antivirus installed, a Windows-based database server that didn't have antivirus installed. All right. Now, because there was no antivirus, ransomware got installed on this particular system, or this particular database server, and then it encrypted the whole database. But the company is not willing to pay the ransom because they have a backup of this server. So what they do instead is they restore the backup, they format the infected server, they do perform a clean format, all right, and then they perform a restore of the backup on the database server. So it has corrected the issue, and that now becomes a corrective control. All right. Aside that, we have what's called compensating controls. Now, compensating controls are normally used where a particular control is not enough or a particular control is not present. the original intended control is not present or is not sufficient. Okay, so I'll give a very practical example. Now, there are times where a particular server, probably a web server or a, a database server that is very critical to the organization, has a particular vulnerability that if you fix it, the server will probably break, or probably even if you install the patch, you are not authorized to restart that server because money comes in from that server 24/7. Every second, that server makes $10,000. All right. So yes, the IT administrators and the business owners of the server will be like, even if we install the patches on this server, we cannot restart it. We can't afford to lose. Let's say it takes 10 minutes for the server to restart, because but as it's restarting, it also needs to install the patches. Okay, and you are also seeing the process of the patches being installed. All right, and then they say we can't afford to lose 10 minutes worth of revenue, and then they say, okay, what can we do? So they say, okay, use a compensating control. Is a ransomware that exploits that vulnerability, right? You install antivirus, and then you also use probably a firewall to ensure that maybe only the administrator and the web server that need access to that database server is granted access. Every other person in the organization is denied access. All right. So this is a compensating control, because the original intended control was not feasible. Okay, so we use supporting controls. So compensating controls are also called supporting controls. You see this more often probably when you are working in an environment and you are carrying out assessments for frameworks like PCI DSS or ISO 27001, and you see that some particular vulnerabilities or some particular requirements can't be implemented due to one issue or the other. You will notice that you need to implement compensating controls so that you can have a pass for that. Right? So let's go now to identity and access management. Right? So in cybersecurity, users have an identity. Okay, so on a network level, you always have an IP address. An IP address is a unique number that identifies a resource on the network. A resource can be a workstation, which is your laptop or desktop. It can also be a server. All right, it can also be a network device, but we're more particular about workstations and servers. And on host level, you can have what is called a username. Okay, so if my name is John Bullion and I work with Sesame Enterprises, okay, so my ID would be john.bullion@sesameenterprises.com, or maybe just john.bullion, or probably my machine might have a machine. So locally I can have a machine name, okay, and like I said, on the network level I can have an IP address. Let's go to the next slide. So identity and access management can be shortened to IAM. And just like identity, I am, who are you? I am, as a dry joke, by the way. So it's a core foundation of security, because identities are quite valuable to attackers. So if you check data breaches, you will see that identities are usually stolen. Credit card numbers, okay, email addresses, passwords, and these identities are usually spoofed. Someone can pretend to be who he is not. Okay, now when someone has the wrong identity, it can use it to perpetrate fraud. Okay, so cyber attacks is not just about hacking systems, but fraud is also part of it, because money operations are controlled by digital systems, not by manual means anymore. All right, so identities need to be protected. Okay, now access controls who has access to what. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, in a company you can have sales department, you can have the engineering department, you can have the IT department, you can have the operations department. Okay, now each of these departments may have their own applications that they use internally. All right, and someone in the sales department has no business with an application used by the IT department. Someone in the IT department has no business with uh, an application used in the operations department, although they might be custodians in charge of maintenance, but they are not authorized to have access to authenticate to these applications and perform any tasks because it's beyond their scope. All right, so with strict access controls, malicious uh, malicious folks are prevented from perpetrating fraud, from compromising systems. All right, because if I can't see it, I can't hack it. Okay, that's the principle beyond access control. If you can't see it, and it means you can't hack it. So identity and access management prevents identity fraud. Very important, bear that in mind. Prevents identity fraud, so I can steal someone's username and password, log into his bank account, wipe it all out. Okay, so IAM tries to prevent this. So let's look at the three main components of IAM. You have authentication. Authentication is just a means of proving that you are who you say you are. Okay, and authentication is usually carried out by a username and a password. All right, so by supplying my username, I'm identifying myself. The password part is the main authentication. It means I'm trying to prove I am who I said I am. Okay, you see, I am is getting repeated there. So in that case, supplying the correct username and password grants you access if you have been given authorization. Now we'll move to authorization. After you've authenticated to a particular system, it doesn't mean you should have access to all components of that system. You should only be granted access to the system based on need to know. Need to know means you are granted access to the resources and data alone that you need for your work and nothing more. All right. So authorization grants you access to the resources and data that you need. All right. So if you are using a particular application, authorization can grant you access to specific modules of the application and not all modules of the application. Okay. Now, in the accounting part of it, it just helps to ensure that whatever activity being carried out by any authenticated user that's been authorized to a particular resource is being recorded, so that if there's a fraud, you can go back to the logs and detect what has happened. So from accounting is also called auditing. From accounting, you can detect abuse, you can detect misuse, you can detect violations and tie it down to a particular username. So let's go to factors of authentication. These are different factors of authentication. Authentication is not just a one-way thing. Now, the use of a username and a password is not so strong as it was before, because passwords now can be cracked. And I can tell you that if you use an extra means of authentication aside the password, it's not like it's recommended, but it can make up for even the weakness of the password. Okay, because even if an attacker has access to your password, he needs that second factor of authentication to gain full access to the application. All right, so let's go to something you know. An example of that is your password or your PIN or a passphrase. All right, so like I said, identification is your username, but authentication is what you use to prove that that is actually your username, what you use to prove that you are who you say you are. All right. Then you go now to something you have. Something you have is like a token, what you call an OTP, one-time password. All right. Now, tokens come in different forms, hard and soft token. Those of you that do internet banking, you have your hard token, you press a button, generates a number. You have what you call one-time password, usually sent via SMS. All right, can be used only once. While tokens are valid for a particular period of time. Okay, but for OTPs, once you use it, it's gone. You need to generate another one. And something you are has to do with your biometrics. Your biometrics, you are either scanning your fingerprint after you supplied your password. Okay, and so the something you know is the basic authentication factor. Okay, and other ones are secondary. So you can have something you know and something you have. Okay, you can have something you know and something you have, that you can put in your password and then put in your biometric print. All right, and when you are doing that, it becomes what we call dual factor authentication. And when you combine different factors of authentication, it becomes multi-factor authentication because it's more than two. All right, and you also have what we call the somewhere you are. Now, the organizations that don't permit users to log in from outside a particular location. So let's say I go to Ghana now, I'm trying to log into my email. The organization say no, you have no business with doing work from Ghana. You must be in Nigeria. So they are just trying to limit the threats. So the threats are limited to Nigerian threat actors. Okay, so you are dealing with something smaller. Besides that, we have what we call something you do. Something you do deals with your typing pattern, your pattern of typing your password. All right, or probably how you sign. May just ask you to sign on a particular part to authenticate. All right, like I said earlier, if you combine two of these factors, it's a dual factor authentication. You combine more than two, it becomes multi-factor. Okay, let's go to access control models. I have role-based access controls, which is based on your job description. So they say, okay, those in sales department, you have access to server A, B, C, D. Okay, now if somebody is employed in that department, they just put the person in that particular group, and based on your membership of that group, you are granted access to server A, B, C, D. All right. Now, rule-based access controls, these are explicitly created rules to say, okay, you as an individual, you have access to this resource. All right, and might be temporary, might be permanent, depending on the business need. Okay, and then we have discretionary based access controls. Discretionary based access control, in this model, you have an owner of the resource. Now, the owner of the resource can be in charge of delegating access to this resource. All right. We also have mandatory access control. This is based on labels like secret, top secret, confidential, sensitive, private, and public. All right. Now, based on your job description, or based on your role, or based on the type of clearance you have, you are granted access to different labels of data. So now let's go to user account management. User account management, we have the principle of least privilege. I've mentioned before that in principle of least privilege, users use only the least privilege possible to carry out their work tasks. It's not practical. It's practical actually, but it's not recommended to carry out operations with a higher level of privilege than needed. Then you also have password security. Now, your password must be strong, must have a combination of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, symbols, and special characters. All right. We talked about privileged and non-privileged accounts. The activities of privileged accounts should be monitored to detect misuse or abuse. All right. We also have lockout policies. So what this means is that if someone is trying to log in multiple times and it's not successful. I was trying to log in with a failed password, with a bad password, the wrong password. The account should be locked out and you need to contact your administrator. The reason this is done is so that someone who has unauthorized access doesn't try multiple passwords and then get successful in the end. All right. I already talked about need to know. What this means is that you should be granted only the appropriate data and resources you need to do your job. You shouldn't be granted anything more than that. Okay. This helps to helps to enforce confidentiality. You also have user account maintenance. You check all these users that have accounts, are they still in the organization? Have they left? Who has higher privileges than normal? The administrators do we have a new administrator that didn't go through the change control process? Okay, and then also look at guest accounts. Do we really need guest accounts? Okay, and if we have guest accounts, are they privileged? Okay, do they use good password? Are they governed by our policies? Then we also have account expiry. Okay, so when users have, maybe you have temporary users and maybe a contractor, you say, okay, how long is your contract for? You say it's for 2 months. You create an account for them that expires on the very last day of their contract. All right. So this is all about user account management, and following these practices will help to ensure that you prevent identity fraud that can lead to further damage. Now let's see, building a career in cybersecurity is the final module of this course. And if you're in security, or you want to start in security, well, it's not a hard thing. You just need to choose the role you want to major in. There are many roles in cybersecurity. Okay, so you can see one here, that of a forensic analyst. The job description is that they are the ones in charge of detecting violations. All right, so when an attack has happened, they try to find out who carried out the attack. Sorry for that. How did the person carry out the attack, and what was the motivation? What was the action that was carried out? Okay, and then you recommend measures for preventing this attack from crystallizing again. We also have what we call penetration testers, or what we call ethical hackers. These are people that carry out security assessments, you test systems, applications, resources, services for security loopholes, and then recommend means to fix them. Security engineers are the ones that deploy solutions. They're the ones that install controls and monitor them. SOC analysts are the ones that monitor events happening across our enterprise network. They also detect misuse, they also detect violations, and they act based on data that they ingest. A malware analyst, what he or she will do would be to analyze a piece of malware to discover the functions. Okay. Security governance and risk officer is more of an administrative person. So what they do is they govern the security activities of the organization. They ensure the organization is in compliance with rules, with policies, with frameworks. Okay. Now, network security engineer is responsible for security across the network. They are mostly the ones that manage firewalls, switches, unified threat management devices, and any other device that helps network security. Security trainer is someone like me, train other people and help them come up to par with their knowledge in cybersecurity. A fraud analyst is someone that detects fraud and recommends measures to prevent fraud from happening. All right. An auditor is someone that tries to detect compliance, the level of compliance with an established body of rules. Okay, so auditors usually pick exceptions and recommend measures to fix these exceptions, because these exceptions can lead to a breach in future. So let's see, you want to build your career, you need to take some certifications. You want to start, I advise you start with the CompTIA Security Plus, because it will give you a basic understanding of what security is all about. Then you can proceed to having your CEH, or what you call a Certified Ethical Hacker. All right, so these two are more or less junior certifications. Then for the next two, the CISM, Certified Information Security Manager, and CISSP, Certified Information Systems Security Professional. These are senior level certifications and require you to have 5 years of experience. Okay, although you can write it before then and wait till 5 years to get certified, but I advise you to gain some experience between say 3 to 5 years. Yes, then you can go for the exam because your experience matters a lot when you're writing the exams. Then the next two, AWS and Azure, these are cloud-based security certifications. Many organizations are moving their infrastructure to the cloud, so you need to be versed in how cloud technologies work and how to secure them. CISA is just like CISM and CISSP. It is a senior level certification. It is Certified Information Systems Auditor. All right. So it just a certification for auditors. So you want to build your career in security, you choose a role, then choose certifications that are relevant to that role. Okay, then you start to develop yourself because a security professional needs passion. You need to keep reading, you need to keep developing yourself, keep sharpening your knowledge base. All right. Then after that, you go for your first job. Try and learn as much as you can. It's even possible to switch between roles or dabble between roles. So take whatever comes your way and handle it and choose wherever you want to major in. So I want to thank you for listening, and I'm quite sure that with all this, you have learned basic introduction in security. Thank you very much, and see you in module 2. Hi, and I want to welcome you to this course. Throughout this course, I'm going to introduce you to cybersecurity. We're going to cover the basics. We're going to cover the very foundation of cybersecurity.